Rusty Drift RC here. Today I've got my ECX Torment on the bench. I've got an upcoming project with this, and first thing I'm going to want to do, I want to do with this is replace the transmission. The transmission in it is still good, but I'm going to be putting in a locked AX10 style transmission from Axial style. Because I want something a little bit stronger, and I want to lock up the differential for the project I'm working on. This is almost a direct fit, but I'll show you what's involved here. First, you're going to want to remove the rear bumper assembly. Start off with the bolt on the motor side that bolts to the transmission case right here. And then you want to loosen this one right here a little bit. Flip back over to this side. Loosen this screw right here. Don't take it, you don't have to take it out all the way, just loosen it. And then on the bottom, these two screws right here, and those two actually go into the transmission. Those are two of the four that hold the bottom of the transmission in. And then the whole bumper should slide right off. And you'll have access to the transmission on the back side here. Next, you're going to want to remove the gear cover so you can have better access to remove the axles. There's just three screws holding that on. Okay. And then you want to remove your axles and your screw pins right there. Remove those. And slide your axles off. Same thing on the other side. Alright, next you've got the two top screws that mount to the shock tower, or back of the shock tower here to help brace things. Remove those two right there. Alright, now that I've got those two off, I'm going to flip it around to the bottom side and just take these last two right here. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and loosen up the shock tower a little bit so that this will lift up and out. Pull that out like that. Okay, now these if you look, it's going to have your AX10 and your ECX transmission have the same mounting holes, although the ECX has this right here, which keys into the bottom of the chassis. This is just flat. Everything will still work, But the ECX has two mounting holes up here to go mount to the shock tower. I don't have those on the ECX, or on the AX10 transmission, which we'll have to, I'll have to make some other brace to brace the top of the transmission to the shock tower so you don't get the flex back here. But we'll get into that later. Alright, now to install the new Axial style transmission, I've pulled the cover off again so I have more clearance to get to the axle shafts. And we're going to start by mounting it. Go ahead and use the we're going to do the first two screws here. Now, you may need new screws. If you've got a metal case, you're going to need to use the machine screws. And if you're using a metal case, make sure that you're using some thread lock on those screws. We're going to go ahead and put those screws in, those first two in, and get those on. Just get those in there loosely for now. Don't tighten them down, because we're going to want to make sure we get all of the screws in before we tighten it. Before we go any further, we're going to go ahead and install the axle shafts so that you can have access still to those still, because with the bumper off. Again, just make sure you line up, you move your transmission to where your holes line up, and then put your screw pins back in. Okay, now that both axle shafts are attached, now if you want, you can start attaching the rear bumper. Now this just slide it. You know, those two slots there go right over like this. Okay. You put your two screws here into the bottom of the transmission. Okay, you can go ahead and tighten those. And tighten down all of your transmission bolts on the bottom, all four of those, now that you got everything lined up. Okay. You can tighten these two screws on the sides of your rear bumper. Tighten that one. Okay, and go to the other side. Okay, now on the motor side of the transmission, you've got your other mount for the bumper here. Now you can take this screw out of the transmission. You may need a longer screw, but you can just flex that back just a little bit, and that'll attach there. Alright, and your bumper is fully attached. Now, the only thing we have to contend with here now is we've got a little bit of, you might have a little flex here now, because we don't have the holes here to mount the transmission to the shock tower. But that's not a problem. We're going to take care of that in just a moment. Alright, I've got my upper transmission brace installed. To build that, I went ahead and used two of the Axial bent rod ends that I had extra with my Yeti kit, and I used the Traxxas pivot balls in those rod ends. I went ahead and I cut about 3 to 5 millimeters off of each rod end before attaching them with a piece of threaded rod, 4 millimeter. I went ahead and used a spacer to mount it to the left rear shock tower mounting hole, and a longer mounting screw for the shock tower. That way it'll clear the upper camber link. And on the transmission side, the upper transmission case bolt there. And again, I used a spacer, about 5-6 millimeter spacer to pull it out away from the case. And a longer screw into the transmission. And now that's nice and strong there. The transmission's not going to flex. Make sure you tighten up all of the shock tower screws that you had loosened up previously. I've got the gear cover on, show you that everything clears nicely. Okay. So we got okay. And there you have it. An Axial AX10 transmission into an ECX Torment. This will work on the amp, the ruckus, the circuit. As you can see, I still have the original rear bumper assembly on there. I did have to trim a little on the mount here to get it to clear the transmission case. But other than that, and your upper brace, that's the only modifications needed.